Well, there we go. Welcome. I'm looking forward to this. Thank you for all of you giving up your time, lunchtime, early morning, evening, whenever it is. I'm going to crack on. I know that it says that we can do an hour. I think even actually the Eventbrite suggested that it was 2 hours. Trust me, it's not going to be 2 hours. But I'll zip through stuff. I hope I make sense, and it gives you a chance to ask lots of questions. So what are we doing then? I want to use neuroscience to really connect with my stakeholders, because I need my stakeholders to take the change and run with it. I need them to be the ones that create and adopt their new ways of working. I'm the one, if you like, that's the ringmaster at the circus. I'm the one that's trying to coordinate stuff, but I'm not impacted by the change. My stakeholders are the ones that are going to live and breathe the change. So how can I best connect with them? The first thing I'm really worried about is that I do think that we have an involvement gap. And just drawing this very simple matrix really brings it home to me, makes it very clear to me that perhaps we're not getting what we should have. So level of involvement over there on the left, and then level of impact on the bottom there. And you can see that we, and I am talking to us because I think I've probably got a lot of change professionals, project professionals, program managers, business analysts, coaches on this call, where we are on the side of we have to try and make change happen. And that's why we came to a webinar about heading up the idea of, creating sort of engaged stakeholders. So there we are as specialists in this world, where what we have is a very high level of involvement because it's our job. That's what we're measured against. Are we actually managing these change initiatives? The problem is our level of impact is quite low. Those who are impacted by the change, high levels of impact, the problem I've got is that their level of involvement is often quite low. So what we've got to do is we've got to up that level of involvement. We've got to increase their motivation to participate. Those who are affected the most by the change, it's their participation. We've got to get them working on this. That's the key thing. Now, I do the Global Capability for Change survey every year, and this is a quick shout out to anyone here who is leading the charge in their organization for building the capability for change. You might be in a centralized change function, you're the head of change management, head of practice, head of transformation, whatever you are. What I'm looking for is you to participate in the next Capability for Change survey. And this is the results from the one in September, October last year. I can't believe it's 6 months already, but we know we've got an involvement gap. Look at how low the figures are. And I'm going to explain these figures, by the way. Explicit means that you've answered questions about you think something is happening. Structurally, you've seen something in your organization. There's a procedure or process that makes it happen. The implicit is that you feel it's happening, that you really believe in the answer you're giving. In this case, they're pretty equal. There's not a big difference. There's not what we call cognitive dissonance, a big gap between them. But less than half of us think that the people in our organizations know that change is coming. So maybe the involvement gap isn't such a surprise. Another one, which is the figures are getting lower, it's even worse, is that, less than 4 in 10 of us think that the people that are impacted really do have the time to adopt new ways of working. So again, reasons for this gap that we have. They don't believe our level of change is manageable. Again, it's less than 50% every time. And lastly, that we're not developing the skills for change management in our people. So we're not helping them cope with the level of change that's coming their way. So for all these reasons, I am really passionate about what I'm saying tonight, which is how do we use brain smarts? Because that's another way of looking at neuroscience, understanding how our brains naturally react to things. And so we can trigger those natural reactions, and that's we get an immediate visceral response. That's what we're looking for. So why have we got the this involvement gap? Why are we not getting the participation we need? And I think that we can see across the board increasing levels of change fatigue. People are tired of the high volumes of change they're experiencing, and they are starting to resist the change. And they're starting to, maybe we call it the quiet quitting. Maybe we call it the great resignation. Maybe people are just pulling back from the discretionary effort, the volunteerism that they make within their organization to get change done. And they can easily do that because the level of change is very high. And so they're supposed to be spreading themselves across multiple changes. And also, they can always make the argument, business as usual is so busy. We've got so many customers to service that I don't have the time for this. But I think that there are some key things in here that we ought to think about in terms of the factors. These factors I want to talk about are getting bigger. So, well, I want to talk about risk and noise and cynicism and competition. And I think actually, because of the volume of change, there are so many changes happening that these are all becoming massively larger. And we're in the perfect storm, basically right in the center of it. So what do I mean by each of these factors? So let me just take this back so I can concentrate one at a time. The first of all, one of the reasons for not getting involved is that change is risky because you're giving things up. You're giving up your certainty of how to do things. You're giving up your understanding of how to do things. And you're exchanging that, the joy of the pain of getting things wrong, which makes us feel bad. So that's unpleasant. So we try to avoid it. So that's how we end up with phrases like change fatigue and resistance to change. It's because we are walking away from a known risk. Of course we are. Noise is just something that I'm really concerned about. There are so many changes. There are so many initiatives being kicked off. The increase in volume of all the change communications. Everybody's receiving so many emails. It creates a level of noise. Nobody can hear what I'm saying because they're spreading their attention across so many emails. Only today, I was looking at techniques for overcoming what the brain we talk about is the dilution effect. The brain is a very fair sort of tool in that if you give the brain 5 things to look at, it will try to spread its attention across all 5 things. So in a very fair way, if you've got sort of 5 messages about changes, then you're getting 20% of somebody's attention. Nothing gets our full attention anymore. So we need to be aware of that with the level of noise and thinking, actually, I'm actually up against quite a few other initiatives. I think we also have to look at increased cynicism. My experience of this is that there are so many more changes, and that the high volume of changes means that when we talk about the well-worn McKinsey factor, we talk about 70% of change initiatives fail. Well, even if you don't subscribe to it being 7 out of 10, let's look at the idea that, maybe a third of changes fail. They don't deliver what we've expected. Maybe they don't deliver a good experience for the stakeholder either. Now, the thing is, if you're just dealing with one change, well, that's fine. But when they're dealing with sort of, they know that within their own team and their own department, maybe there's 6 changes happening and 2 of those aren't going well. So that feeds your cynicism, doesn't it? Because you're seeing failure around you. Yes, there are some successes, but they are also seeing failure. They're seeing failure because there is that high number of changes that increases the odds that some of them won't work. And that gives you evidence, real live evidence that not all change works. What's the answer? I don't think I'm going to give up my discretionary effort to take part in this change. I'm going to walk back from that. I don't think this would be a good idea. So that's the cynicism. Our messages about the benefits of the change and how wonderful it's going to be are not going to be taken at face value. And we have to be careful, therefore, that, standard statements about what's in scope, what the plan is, what the contents of the change are, or the reasoned arguments for why change happen aren't necessarily going to create a response a positive response, we're not going to generate the participation we're looking for. That's what this webinar is all about, is how do I therefore use brain smarts to create more of an emotional connection, an emotional reaction, a real pull to overcome that cynicism. And lastly, I know this is something that you all tell me about all of the time. With that high volume of change, the people that we want to engage the most, the people that we need to help lead the change on the ground, to role model it, to be early adopters of it, because they have high followship, they are trusted resources amongst their colleagues, well, they are in high demand. Because if I've worked out that they're pretty brilliant, other change initiatives have also worked out they're pretty brilliant and are trying to get their attention as well. So we know that they're spread too thin, and it's a real problem for them. So when I'm inviting people to workshops, I want to co-create change with them. Maybe the attendance is much lower than it might have been, because it's not that they don't want to, it's just that they can't because of so many other changes going on. So it's almost like we have to sort of shout out, pick me, yeah. I've got a question in the chat about how do I address cynicism without creating toxic positivity. I'm going to show you, because I'm going to use neuroscience to do that. And what I'm going to create, Elske, is I'm going to create much more of a very visceral reaction, an immediate emotional reaction. So that bypasses cynicism. Okay. So we've talked about this being the perfect storm, and these are the reasons why we need to maybe address things. So now we're going to get onto something. I'm not a negative person, and I don't criticize things a lot, but I am worried about the perhaps more traditional approach that we have to stakeholder and identification and analysis, because I don't think it's getting us where we need to be in terms of the engagement. I think as far as the engagement is concerned, what we do is we have a tendency to have a look at what somebody's role is. Maybe we use job titles as part of that analysis. We talk about which departments they're in, the role they're playing. Are they the customer for this change? Are they in a governance or decision-making role for this change? So that's one of the things that we do. And I'm not sure that connects with the brain. It just bounces right off. I work for a lot of organizations that have very flat structures, and this kind of hierarchical analysis really doesn't sort of connect with them. Because I think the other thing that we do is we sort of slice and dice the kind of information we're giving people based on their level of interest, their level of power and influence, and where they sit in the hierarchy. Well, these tools have something to offer, I think, in terms of making you think, what content do I want to share? What information do I want to share? But it doesn't create an immediate reaction. It doesn't create that urge to take action. The stakeholder doesn't think, yeah, I want to get involved. We've given them the appropriate briefing, so they're informed at the appropriate level, relevant to their role, but that is very different from creating an engaged stakeholder who can take part in something. So again, I think this just sort of bounces right off. And that is what I'm concerned about, because I think, as we're going to see here, we don't have the time for this. I can't afford to miss the connection with my stakeholders. I can't afford to, when I've done that analysis, thinking about, maybe I'm thinking about their actual job, but that's very different to their specialist knowledge, their passion, or otherwise for the change. So what can happen based on that more old-fashioned stakeholder analysis is that I end up sort of telling, not asking. So I'm not, engaging somebody, I'm not getting them involved, I'm telling them the right information, and I'm probably getting the wrong tone. So that I don't mean to, but by treating them in that way, I sort of put their back up and get them resisting me, because I sort of like, I'm directing them and telling them what's needed, rather than inviting them in, perhaps, or asking them to share their specialist skills to make a difference. And I also know that I've got the dilution of the message because there's so many other requests on their time. And what this made me think of, this is one of the classics of my dog walking that I do, is I was thinking about what one of my colleagues in the States called effort dollars. That we only have so much time in the day. And as I said, I've been doing this for 13 hours today so far. So I really can't create any more time than about 13, 14 hours in a working day. I think we all know that's far too much. Yeah? But time is not something I can create. So there is a certain amount, and I have to spend it wisely. With the huge number of stakeholders I have, because with so many changes being connected to each other, I'm not just often talking to those who are directly impacted, but there are knock-on effects upstream and downstream in the organization where I need those sort of more peripheral stakeholders to still do something. I need them to change a bit of what they do, how they work, to fit in with the major changes that are happening in the department I'm absolutely focused on. So I've got a lot more stakeholders. I still haven't got any more time though, have I? So in terms of how I spend my time wisely, what I need to ensure is that when I communicate, those messages really land. If they don't, I've got all that effort of the communication, but the problem is that few people are attending my meetings. I haven't got the level of volunteerism that I need. I have to chase for progress. So what's happened is I've spent some of my effort dollars doing that, but I didn't get what I needed. So I have to go round again and do it again. I don't have the time to repeat myself. That's not spending my time wisely. So what I want to ensure in this far more competitive, far more cynical environment is that when I communicate with my stakeholders, that they are able to take the action, they're willing to take the actions that I need them to take. That's the key thing that I'm looking for. It's all about being really, if you think about it, dealing with this is the neuroscience is smart working. And I think that's probably why I'm so attracted to it, because I know I can't work any harder. So I need to work a lot smarter to make sure that the time I have on each of my programs is actually generating the results that I want. This is what has led me to this more of this neuroscientific approach. What I want to do is the logical arguments, the reasoned argument about this is why the change is so important. And this is what Elska was saying in the chat. She was sort of worried about creating almost a toxic sort of cynicism by keep saying what all the benefits are. I think we've all been there, haven't we? We explain what all the benefits are and why this change is so amazing. You know, we make logical arguments for people. And hopefully, you know, unfortunately what tends to happen is those tend to bounce right off. Hopefully I also tell engaging stories. I use metaphors. I describe people, place and time, all the things that Sean Akers' magical work on corporate storytelling tells us to do. I do all of that, but again, I'm telling those engaging stories, but up against sort of the risks, the noise, the cynicism, the competition, they're bouncing right off. I need a mechanism that goes straight to the heart of how somebody feels, because then they'll have a reaction. So I need brain-friendly messages, effectively. That is what I'm trying to create. So what makes something a brain-friendly message? Well, I'm going to talk to you about primary sort of triggers in the brain, primary drivers for action in the brain. They are so fundamental to how our brains operate. We don't necessarily notice that we are being guided by these things. But there's a lot of neuroscience out there that starts to explain what these are. These are effectively the primary drivers. They trigger an automatic response. A visceral response, if you like, something that we can't help ourselves do. I was talking to somebody yesterday about, they said something very impactful for me. And I said to them, wow, I sort of said, because what they were saying was so exciting. It was an opportunity to do some work. And I sort of said, wow, that's made my stomach flip. That is so, wow, that's so exciting. And it was that visceral response that, and I couldn't stop myself having that response. It was driven by the limbic system in the brain, where I was just simply emoting and going, wow, because what they were offering really connected to more than one of these key drivers in the brain. It actually connected to the idea of choice and growth and respect. So such amazing drivers. I'm going to explain what these drivers are in just a moment. But because it connected with those things that my brain is always looking for, that triggers my behavior, wow, I couldn't stop myself. I was like, yes, yes, this is brilliant. This is exactly what we want. So let me explain what these drivers are, and hopefully then you'll see my system, because in a moment I'm going to talk about my system for how we communicate change. But first, let me sort of step back and talk about what the primary drivers are so that we sort of understand them. And I'll give you some examples, because I'm sure we're all sort of there. We understand what they are, but it's nice to have an example as we go. The first one is connection. And what we're talking about there is the brain's need for social interaction, being part of something, being part of a community, having the support of others. There's some really interesting research that's come out of the pandemic. In fact, I was saying to somebody the other day that I was aware of that research, and in the first couple of lockdowns, and in the third lockdown that we had where I live, here in Spain, I made sure I applied it, which was that you can have micro engagements with people, and that can really lift you, because it connects you back to the wider world. So I remember that we were allowed out to walk the dogs and things, and I started going at the same sort of time, and started, even though it was across the road from somebody, I could wave at somebody, and I became familiar with their face. I became familiar, and they became familiar to me. I became familiar to them. And we had that social connection. It was sort of that immediate piece, which was amazing. I'll also say I want to give another visceral response there in terms of connection, social connection. That I have a neighbour who's a difficult person. But I'm always very polite, and I'm very much about relationship building, as some of you who know me. It's all about good stakeholder engagement in every aspect of our lives. And I was walking my dog in the woods, and I saw him, and I was really late for an appointment, but I called out, "Hi, how are you?" And he completely blanked me. Now, the rational argument in my brain came later. The first thing that I couldn't help myself, I had that visceral response of just white hot anger. Dare he blank me? How dare he ignore me? Now, the rational argument kicked in. Maybe he's got headphones on, or maybe he's a bit more deaf than we think. His Labrador had seen me, so I was a bit, I'm not sure the rational argument held true. I don't think I really believed myself. But the point is that the rational argument came later, because that's coming out of another part of the brain. There's a delay between the limbic system, which kind of emotes. The limbic system's like a 3-year-old on sugar. It throws tantrums. It can't help itself. The prefrontal cortex, if we can get instead the message to the prefrontal cortex, there's a bit of a delay. That's why the rational argument came later. Only a couple of seconds later, but it came later. Which was, oh, maybe he's deaf or he's got headphones in. The prefrontal cortex is sort of a responsible bit of the brain, very, very organized. It's got a mortgage, it's got an alarm clock, it goes to work every day. Hopefully that also illustrates that sometimes you can't overcome the primary drivers. They are there, that they are things the brain definitely wants to make it happy. Predictability is the desire, a very strong desire we have to know what is going to happen next. Our brains are pattern recognition machines, and they our brain is constantly trying to sort of calculate what's going to happen next, So nothing surprises it. It likes certainty, it likes predictability, it likes to know what's happening. And so we're constantly working out, where do we go now? What do we go next? Last night, when I got locked in the car park, I lost my predictability because the police had closed a road near to where I was going. I'd already had to drive around the streets a few times, and I was getting really anxious because I didn't have the certainty of, oh, but I always park there when I come to this building, and I can't do that anymore. So I immediately, the visceral response when I realized the road was closed, my stress levels went off the scale because I'd lost the certainty. Because when I was driving to the building, my brain was already picturing me pulling into the usual parking space and walking into the building. And it had already worked out how long it was going to take me to do that. And there was that certainty. And the brain gets very stressed as soon as what it's expecting to happen doesn't happen. Flip it on its head. If we give the brain predictability, if we give the brain a plan and we explain what's going to happen, we give it some certainty, then there's a great positive reaction. Oh, I'm happy now, I can take part in this. So it kind of makes the point that really we need to explain the journey of change very clearly, because our stakeholders' brains can get behind that journey and go, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, okay, fine. Know what's coming up, know what's coming up next. Yeah, great. So predictability, very important. When it comes to choice, oh, this is autonomy by any other name, isn't it? We like to be able to take charge of our own destiny. We like to decide what we're going to do, what we're not going to do. Something to think about in terms of change. I keep it really simple. And for me, what's in my head is ask, don't tell. Because as soon as you ask, what do you think should be happening? As soon as you ask, what do you think are happening? What would you like to do? How would you like to use your skills? Any open question is brilliant. Yeah, that gives you that choice. Jane's just asked in the chat whether or not I've gone for left and right hemispheres. No, I haven't, Jane. I have not at all. It was just simply that I put them up there this way. I'm not going to do a lecture on the hemispheres in the brain today, but just primary drivers exist, and that's all you need to worry about. Equality. Wow, this is about fairness. Oh, can our brains trigger a reaction if we think we have been treated unfairly by somebody? So if you are queuing, I was queuing in the bakery recently, and it was a bit of a muddled queue. And as I thought I was getting closer, somebody else who I thought had queued less than me, the person behind the counter said, "And how can I help you?" and then served them. Now, it wasn't anybody's fault. They weren't trying to be difficult, but my brain was screaming. Again, the limbic system, a badly behaved 3-year-old, that's what it feels like. So as soon as we create some kind of inequality, it's not right that, you're disadvantaged, compared to some other experience. It's like when I pull up to the traffic lights and I'm waiting at red, and then later on somebody else pulls up beside me in the other lane, but they get to drive off first for whatever reason. Oh, really? That just winds you up because it's not fair. I was waiting here longer. So it is a really visceral response that we can't help ourselves. The brain is just going for it and going, yeah, I want that. Respect. This is about status. Now, we don't always have to be the top person in the room. But what we need to know is that, we need to understand where we are in the pecking order. And we don't like to lose that sort of status. We like to have some respect. We like to be acknowledged as, we don't want to lose our status. I might be known as the go-to person for something. If you change the platform we're using, my sort of skill set suddenly disappears. Yeah. So at the end of the day, what I'm really concerned about is making sure that we we are giving people the opportunity when they lose knowledge, they lose skills and experience in the change. I have got to have a pathway where they can go back and rebuild that status, being known to being good at something. You know, otherwise there is that response, which is, why would I get involved? I'm voting for my own annihilation. And lastly, one that is Carol Dweck has written extensively on the growth mindset. It's the pleasure we experience in learning something new. We get a real dopamine hit when we build new skills, knowledge, capabilities. And there's a deep-seated reason for that in the brain, in that when we know how to do something more, when we have acquired skills, when we are more able to do something, then we are more protected. This is why it's a visceral response, because we know that the more we know how to do things, the more we can cope with whatever life throws at us. And when we're under high stress, this is a particularly interesting one, because it gives people a sense of security. So I had to put, or I didn't know how to put oil in my car. I could have called a mechanic, but what I did was I watched a video and thought, all right, okay, I watched several videos actually. I still got it wrong because I put apparently too much oil in, which is not good for cars. Who knew? But I tried it and I felt like I'd acquired a skill. I acquired several skills because I didn't know how to open the bonnet of my car. I didn't know where to put oil. I didn't know what oil to buy. So I acquired some information and skills that I didn't have before. And although my car screaming at me that it didn't have any oil and it wasn't going to work because of that, the end of the day, you know, I felt better because I knew more than when I'd started. And that's, again, a very important driver for us. So this is why I've sort of got this system that I'm dealing with, in that when I want to communicate, and we talk a lot, don't we, in change about in our roles, what we're doing is curating the message to really hit home to people, to give them the relevant messages. When I'm starting to think about how I curate my messages for stakeholders, I always start with the primary drivers. And I ask myself, you know, there's our primary drivers. There I am looking at connection. There I am looking at predictability and choice and the equality and the sort of the respect, and then the idea of growth. I'm thinking, right, if you're going to communicate, you need to trigger at least one of these, because what I'm looking for is to trigger that behavior. And triggering that instinctive response is fantastic, because I don't then have to take all the time required for the long-winded rational argument, really, which is what we're talking about. So this is why in the Agile Change Coach course, I've developed 41 neuro hacks, brain shortcuts that sort of really are driven by these sort of visceral responses, so that what we're doing is having the greatest impact in terms of the stakeholders that we can possibly have. So I've got lots of different techniques that connect to what it is that we're doing here. So this afternoon, for example, I've been training the Agile Change Coach course, and one of the things we were looking at was we've been looking at, well, how do you enable people to what you want to do is build a feeling of teamness. People are part of a community that's affected by change. It goes to that connection piece. If I want to get people engaged in the change, I need to point out how many similar others, people that they respond to, people that they recognize as their peer group, are actually also impacted. So no, we're not just punishing you with this change, that people that you know, that you respect, that are doing something similar to you, they are also changing. And so we can create that feeling of connection, even if those examples aren't from their own organization. So we can point out people in other organizations, maybe in competitor organizations, that are going through a very similar change. So they're feeling there is a sense of connection. They are not alone. And we know that that has quite a big impact on, oh, okay, then it's safe to be a part of this, because actually my peer group around the world are also going through this. So I'm not stepping into the unknown. Actually, that feeds a little bit on predictability as well. I'm not stepping into the unknown. Hey, I'm a part of this. So using the primary drivers is almost like your success criteria for, is this a really good communication or not? You've got to ask yourself, will it connect to a primary driver? Because if the answer is no, then just don't do it. Go back and rework things so that it does. Because otherwise you're going to communicate, but we're back to that idea of effort dollars. You're going to waste your time. You'll communicate, it will go out into the ether, it will have no effect, but it will also put you on the back foot, because the next time you communicate, it's a second round of it. And people will be going, oh, I ignored her message last time, I can ignore it this time. And that's quite a dangerous place to be. Just putting in the chat quickly, 1 is yes, 2 is no. Do those primary drivers, do you recognize that in yourself? Does that make sense to you? Do you start to think, yeah, some of the experiences she's talking about, that makes sense, yeah? Oh, I'm loving that. I'm seeing all the ones come up. And I love it. Somebody put 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. And some people even bothered to put exclamation marks. That's interesting. And it is, I tell you what, once you understand this stuff, you can't help yourself. In any social situation, you start to think, oh, yes, that, oh, yes, that's, I know what's happening now. I got something where somebody taught me through the journey. I don't like driving, and I've got to go somewhere unexpected. So I got them to talk me through it. And I could feel with the predictability, okay, we go there, look for that landmark. And I could feel that almost they were doing a journey planner for me. And I could feel that journey planner reducing my stress. So we're talking here about creating that visceral, yes, want to get involved. But we mustn't forget that also at the same time, because we're meeting the need of the primary driver, it also reduces the level of stress. When we know, when I talked to somebody the other day about how, other people in their organization were going through the same change, they didn't know that because they didn't know about other teams and departments elsewhere. And I talked about their experiences. There was both social connection and there was the equality piece. Both of those drivers were being met, and that made them feel good. And then went on to target my communication about growth, actually, because I talked about the opportunities for learning and building their skills. And I linked that to career development in their organization. And I know I was, wow, have I got a motivated stakeholder now, which I love. I thought I'd be a bit more explicit and give you an example of this. So I'm going to talk about the primary driver, which was, I wanted to do that choice one. And so the impact of that primary driver on behaviour is that there is a deep-seated need to choose what we do, not have the choice taken away from us. As soon as somebody tells you to do something, all choice has been removed. You are now, and this also goes to the idea of respect, the status, because if I tell you to do something, I've taken away choice. You're not in control of your actions. You don't have a sense of power. What's happened as soon as somebody gives you an instruction is effectively in terms of the status, I would go up the status because I obviously have the answers, I have the information, and I'm telling you. And therefore that implies that you are going down the status, that you are in some way, you're not as clever as me. You don't have the answers. So it affects, when we talk about when we give instructions, this absolutely affects the choice driver, but it also has an effect for that idea of the respect driver. So it can affect both, and that's really bad. So what does good look like? Well, self-determination. That is about, it is about, I've got the autonomy, I've got the power, self-directed teams, people making decisions about how they're going to do something for themselves. And we're no longer at the whim of other people. We're no longer sort of subjugating what we do to what others want us to do. So when I'm doing the Agile Change Coach course, it's all about, okay, you get this, but I want to give you ways in which you can actually make it happen. So yes, we're talking a little bit about this theory here, but on the course, it's all about, well, how do we do this? How do we do this? Lots and lots of techniques, 41 of them, in fact, 41 neuro hacks. And so here's one when we talk about, it's all about setting boundaries for control. It's a very simple technique because it's all about clarity. So it also meets this predictability piece. So you're working with a sponsor or you're working with a manager and you're trying to sort of do some work on a particular change. We want to give you, if we're going to meet the need of choice, we want to give you as much opportunity to solve problems and take action for yourself so that you're not having to wait for instructions from others. Thing is, bit of a grey area. So I'm working on a change. I'm working for the sponsor. I don't know much about the sponsor, but they are my boss and I don't want to displease them. So I've got, if it's not explicit, if the boundary between where I can have control and where they have control is not, that choice is not clear, then there's two choices really, isn't there? I end up escalating lots and lots of things to the sponsor because I'm not sure, and therefore I look like a real worrywart, or I don't escalate very much. I just get on with it and keep my head down, and I have a lot of sort of choice then. I have a lot of autonomy. The problem is I look quite arrogant and I'm sending a message to the sponsor who's expecting to be more involved that, I don't need you, I don't want you. So either way, I'm going to get it wrong. But if instead I have a contracting conversation with the sponsor, if I try to establish what the boundaries are with the sponsor, then I know where I can have choice. And we hope that the majority of the work, the biggest box here is the permission to select and authorize activities. And I can talk to the sponsor about what my specialist skills are, what I'm experienced in doing. And so we can have this conversation back and forth about how far I can go without having to maybe escalate something up. And maybe I'm escalating up potential solutions to something, but I might not have just the authority to action them. So I need to escalate them up. And there may even be the odd one or two things that the sponsor says, if this happens, notify me immediately. I wish I'd known this 20 odd years ago when I was working on a project where I could put it into context. I was working for the global chief operating officer, a very powerful person in a very big global organization. He is now the CEO of another very big global organization, so I'm certainly not naming him. But he made it very clear to me that I had an awful lot of autonomy over how I ran the program. I was a program director, and I had a lot of budgetary authority and everything. But he did actually make it clear, if anything in your program touches this department, X department, run by his mortal enemy, then I had to notify him immediately. I thought that was really interesting because he was setting the boundaries very clearly, letting me get on with all sorts of things. Yeah. But it's very much about, he was setting that boundary, and therefore I was very, very comfortable with my level of choice. I knew what I had authority over because of that clarity. And this is a simple technique that we can do to achieve that. So lots and lots of things we can think about. As far as making use of these primary drivers. I know that Ash has put in the Q&A. I did say use the chat, but I did see in the Q&A there, I want to use these primary drivers to get a raise from my boss. Well, let's just have a bit of fun with that, shall we, Ash? Let's just have a little look at it and thinking about those primary drivers. You want a visceral response from your boss about, absolutely want to pay this person more. And I think, just taking one off the top of my head, You could do fairness, in that you could provide a lot of evidence about how actually, compared to other people doing a very similar role, your salary is completely much lower than theirs. So that could trigger recognition that actually there's inequality here, and I'm responsible for that inequality. That is not great. Yeah, so maybe something to think about. So if you want to develop more of this, then this is why I'm putting this webinar together, because I just want you to have a couple of days where you think about learning all these techniques on the Agile Change Coach course. So please put more questions in the chat, by the way, because I'm very, very happy to respond to any and all questions and observations. So just use the chat to sort of say anything you want to ask me. But the reason I put together the Agile Change Coach course, coaching yourself, and therefore being able to coach your stakeholders through change and getting that response from them, that is what's really important to me. And it's all about the neuro hacks. One of the things I will say is that, again, I'm responding to how we are these days in terms of time pressure. And the thing that drives me all the time on the Agile courses that I've developed, I'm the chief examiner for these courses. I authored the textbook. I mean, yes, there's a picture of it there, but here's my one from my desk this morning, is because I passionately believe that what we need is how to do things, that we don't need what to do. I think there's enough, you can read any book and every book to know what you should be doing. The most important thing is you know how to do it, because that is what that's what we're, we've got to make a difference these days. So what I like about the feedback I get on the courses is that, there's lots of real life experience being shared. We're using the tools and techniques today already. People are going, yeah, I can use this, I can walk away and use this. And as I said, I'm training the same course today actually, and they are loving it, which I think is great. Do primary drivers trump secondary drivers? Well, the one thing to think about, Jenny, is that they are genuinely, they create that visceral response. When that guy offered me this opportunity for work yesterday, it was so exciting because it really hit home. It hit home on respect. It hit home on growth. It was just that moment, and that a real emotional pull. I couldn't help myself very much. It was just that my brain going, yes, you want to do that. And that's the kind of response we want to generate in stakeholders. So yeah, apply those primary drivers. I've got a question from Jane about how might we manage changing sponsorship, going from lots of autonomy and trust to command and control. And if that is the urge of that person, it's a very interesting question. What is at risk, Jane, in that situation is actually your tenure in the program, because you will feel that without the primary driver for yourself of that choice being met, you're going, well, I haven't got choice. I haven't got agency over my own life. Why would I stay and continue sort of doing that job? I think when it comes to command and control, why don't we flip it for a moment and think that actually maybe what that sponsor is looking for is another primary driver, which is predictability. If you can give them that predictability and you keep them informed at a very detailed level of what is going to happen next, always getting and asking them to sort of give their views of what's happening, you meet that need for predictability. I think you will find, certainly in my experience, that there is a little bit more choice that comes your way. There's a little bit more autonomy that's given. But just flip command and control and think, well, what primary driver is that they're looking for to be met? And when that's the case, think about it as, yeah, that is the predictability one. So I would say, Jane, that it's all about the quality of the ease of understanding of your change plan. In the Agile Change Management Handbook, I talk about the roadmap, and that's a very visual journey planner. So it meets the need for predictability in a very engaging way, very easy for sponsors to understand. But there's something else about it that I think is really important. What's really important is that the roadmap is quite high level. And so what it's directing the sponsor to think about and have command and control over effectively is at the higher level of what the outcomes are going to be. And using that kind of agile roadmap planning technique gets you away from the sort of the traditional Gantt chart of I'm going to do this, then this, then this, then this. Because as soon as you get into any kind of plan that sorts out all the activities you're going to go through, you are inviting that person to get into much more of the micro and have control over and have views over and tell you what to do at a much more micro level. So one of the things you can do is, yes, it's predictability, but up it a level and get it up into the level of this is the capability we're going to build at this part of the program, then this capability, then this capability. Are these the capabilities you want for the organization? But what you haven't got into is that lower level of I'm going to do this activity, then this one, then this one. And they go, well, why are you running that workshop? And who are you inviting to that workshop? You really don't want to invite them into that level of micromanagement. Darlene's asked me, how do you make connections when stakeholders are outright fatigued? And apparently it's not me. Or it's just another change. Again, I think it is about shaping up what we say back to those primary drivers, because that's where you cut through the fatigue, Darlene, because you go, I had this from a client a couple of years ago, and I love the idea of it because he made the point, I think we can all understand it. When you're passionate about something, you're not really tired. I've told you I've done 13 hours today. I'm currently standing up at my stand-up desk talking to you. And am I enjoying myself? Yes, I'm loving it. I'm passionate about my subject. I love my job. I've got so much experience and knowledge to share. And I'm at that point in my career where building your career is the thing that's more interesting to me. I want you to be successful. So I'm totally motivated to do this. And that's the point about overcoming fatigue, is that we want to trigger that response. So many of my primary drivers are being met by being with you today, particularly obviously the growth one. Yeah, because it's choice. Oh, absolutely. I chose to run this webinar at this time on a busy day, so I think you can cut through that fatigue. We always make time for the things that we're passionate about. You can create that passionate response, that emotional connection by going, yeah, I want to be a part of that, because you're hitting the primary drivers. So make sure that when you communicate, you're going, how does that trigger at least one, usually 2, 3, or 4 of those primary drivers? That would be ideal. Time-wise, as usual, we're coming to the end. It's about 5:02, and I do try to finish at 5:02 because although some of you, it might be the evening, but for some of you, it's lunchtime or early morning, and you've got another meeting on the hour. So thank you so much for your questions. Do come and join me on this course, because I think you will find, well, everybody tells me, 2 days it will just give you answers for the next 2 years on how to do your programs. So come and join me. I run the course every month or so. It's a couple of days and it is well worth the effort. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop the recording now so that give everybody a bit of a break from my voice. It's been an